The opening words today will be 3 poems by the Sufi mystical poet Hafiz. Many people know about Rumi, but not so many about Hafiz. But I like Hafiz because he's so exuberant and playful. And the first one is one of his more exuberant ones. It's called Everywhere. Running through the streets screaming, throwing rocks through windows, using my own head to ring great bells, pulling out my hair, tearing off my clothes, tying everything I own to a stick and setting it on fire. What else can Hafiz do to celebrate the madness, the joy of seeing God everywhere? Yeah, I forgot to tell you about how he brings himself into the poems a lot of times, too. So, the second one is called The Seed Cracked Open. And if you're not a theist, you can think of God as your divine spark. The seed cracked open. It used to be that when I would wake in the morning, I could with confidence say, "What am I going to do today?" That was before the seed cracked open. Now Hafiz is certain there are 2 of us housed in this body, doing the shopping together in the market and tickling each other while fixing the evening's meal. Now when I wake, all the internal instruments play the same music. God, what love mischief can we do for this world today? And then, speaking of love, the sun never says. Even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, "You owe me." Look what happens with a love like that. It lights the whole sky.
Our words of reflection are by Mary Oliver, the Pulitzer Prize-winning poet. Wild geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things.
The mystic path is one that works for me. I want to say at the outset that this may not be your path. Each person must find what works for him or her. I say this because I can sometimes get enthusiastic and have had people think I was trying to convert them. I'm not. I'm sharing my story. I chose the title for this talk as UU Mystics and Community because I was surprised to discover in the World magazine that there are UU Mystics and they have a website. And in addition, they have a Facebook page, and the Facebook page is called UU Mystics and Community. I know this is because of it's a social media network, but it also works for me in terms of mysticism because mystics are always in community. It used to be that mystics, they were those navel gazers that prayed all day in the caves, ascetics. But in our culture, we need a different kind of mystic, a mystic who is not only praying, but also working in the community. So the ideas of mysticism are really part of the UU meanings, understandings also. So, what is a mystic? Mystics like you believe in this in interdependence. Understanding interdependence in both head and heart influences one's behavior. Jesus says that the kingdom of God is both within you and among you. Each of us is divine and human, as Jesus was. We are all sons and daughters of God. Mystics believe we are ensouled. That is, we do not have a soul, but we are a soul. I note that I used God language, but I am not referring to that old white guy in the sky. For me, I find God in the cosmos, the living, breathing cosmos. God is present in all things, so God is also present in all sentient beings and the living, breathing earth. The idea that God, however you understand that concept, is present in all things in the universe pervades mystic thought. This idea that God is in everything is called pantheism. Christian mystics like Matthew Fox are panentheists, which means that they see God in everything, and they also believe that there's a prime mover, a God that put the whole thing in motion, as opposed to what the scientists believe is everything goes back to that point from which came the great flaring forth and everything that exists in our universe. Mystics like Brian Swimme, who is a mathematical cosmologist, believes that the universe is the mystery, and the powers of the universe like allurement, transformation, and homeostasis are also present in us, since we are we are each a manifestation of some part of the universe. Each of us is made up of elements created by the universe, and each of us is a manifestation of the unity that is the cosmos. Swimme was a disciple of Thomas Berry, who coined the phrase new creation story. It is their hope that if our story is one of the living cosmos, we would perhaps agree on more than we do now, with differing stories on what it is to be human. The Sufi Neil Douglas Klotz is also a linguist who translates holy texts from Hebrew, Aramaic, and Coptic. His translations resonate with the idea of this new creation story. He believes that the divine breath is the holy, the unity, the one, and our individual breath is part of the holy breath. That is the cosmos. I mean, mysticism is hard to put in prose. It works better in poetry. I'm giving it a try anyway. Seeing the world in this way is a both-and way of looking at the world. We're steeped in Western thought, which is a either-or kind of world. I mean, it's part of our culture, and it's difficult to get to that both-and place. But when we are in the both-and place, then it opens the world to a lot of possibilities. I quote the poet Walt Whitman, who says, "Do I contradict myself? Then I contradict myself. I contain thousands." And so it's with this magnificent opening of possibilities that the mystic looks at the world. Now, Hazrat Inayat Khan was a Zen master and a Sufi, and he brought mysticism to the West. And he describes this ability to experience the holy outside belief systems. That is, that what most mystics believe, they don't want to believe in any particular theological framework. What their be-all and end-all is an experience of the holy. And it doesn't matter what you believe. What matters is how you experience the holy in your life. So he says that the Sufi mystic, needs to be a Jew in the temple, a Christian in church, and a Muslim in the mosque. In other words, we're embracing all these possibilities. If there is a truth in the mystery, it's accessible by in all kinds of ways. You can be a Hindu or a Buddhist or any particular way that works for you to have an experience of the holy. I need to stop here and say that Sufis are mystics associated with Islam because they formed the Brotherhood of Sufis to counteract the violent behaviors that developed in Islam. Some Sufis, however, say that Sufis have always been around in the Middle East and became Muslim because of the teaching of the one God, the unity. And so that unity is expressed in Arabic as Allah, and it isn't copyrighted by the Muslims. If you go to a service in the Middle East, a Christian service, and the God in the service will be referred to as Allah, and more than just God, it's a God in a way that is the unity. I don't know how else the unity, the wholeness, the oneness. Now, Western Christian mystics use the teachings of Meister Eckhart. He was a 14th century German who developed the four paths of creation spirituality, which Matthew Fox has resurrected. It's very interesting that in the three Abrahamic faiths, that this mystic aspect is not taught in seminaries, for instance. They teach dogmatic theology, but they don't teach this mystic understanding of the universe, of what it is to be human. So, and Eckhart himself had an interesting relation to the Catholic Church because of his ideas like, what does God do all day? He's on a birthing bed giving birth to the universe. Or what does it matter if Mary gave birth to God 1,400 years ago if we don't give birth to God every day in our own lives? So anyway, he was excommunicated and brought into the fold 3 or 4 times because of his beliefs. And Jewish mystics have the teachings of the Kabbalah. I don't know a lot about the Kabbalah, but it has to do with the way the letters in the Middle Eastern languages work, in Hebrew and Arabic. Those, each letter has a significance, and each word can be developed because you look at its root, and so it's another way that possibilities are increased. And this process is called midrash. And the Hebrews do it, and the Jews, and Douglas Klotz does it with Jesus' words. He does midrash on, and so he expands the understandings that we have. Jews sometimes call this reading. The rabbis say that what they're doing in Genesis and the Bibles of the books of the Torah is reading the white space. And as I listen to interviews and read, I find that the mystic traditions of these 3 Abrahamic faiths have much more in common with each other than they have with the faiths out of which they grew. Mystics of these 3 faiths want an experience of the holy. Belief systems are mute in the presence of the holy. Rumi, the 13th century Sufi mystic and poet, developed the whirling ritual to enhance the odds of having a mystical experience. Dervishes would stay up all night dancing and chanting in order to experience the holy. And they called this, when they woke up at when the sun rose and the rituals were over, they would say that they experienced the grandeur of the universe. And it's interesting too that what these mystics intuited all these years is shown to be true in science. The science has validated this way of looking through the world, of having everything interconnected. Now, the Kabbalists, I want to differentiate here mysticism from the mystical experience. So mysticism is a desire to experience the holy, and the mystical experience is that experience of the holy. Now, the Kabbalist Rabbi Lawrence Kushner, whom I heard interviewed a few weeks back on the Krista Tippett show, talks about what happens when you have such a mystical experience. So he talks about imagining a big circle, and that's the universe, the cosmos. And then each of us being a manifestation of that are the little circles inside the big circle, okay? And so we're diversity, and that's unity. And he said to think of us being enclosed in a cell membrane, and that sometimes the cell membrane relaxes, and then we're in the unity. We're in the whole. We no longer have our egos and our self-identifying, but we're part of the grandeur that the Sufis describe after they do their whirling rituals. He says that mystical experience that's not done through meditation and whirling and chanting usually happens unexpectedly and is transient. And I did have an experience like that. It was when they used to have that associated with the Jazz Fest. They had a piano competition, and when this man started playing the dolphin song, I describe it as I disappeared, because I was not conscious of me, okay, until the song was ended and I came back. And so I call it being disappeared, but it's that you're disappeared from your ego, that you become part of the one, and in the one, you're this little drop of water in the big ocean, not the I, our ego. The ego is hard to get rid of, and so it's always, for me, such a blessing when you can come to that disappeared state, like in meditation or chanting or listening to the dolphin song. Dolphin dance, I think it's called. I even had Tom Botsford, who was my boss then, and I knew I had him find me that dance so that I could listen to it over and over again, thinking I could have this mystical experience, but you can't do that. It just happens. Mysticism and mystical experiences are as varied as mystics. Trying to describe either one leaves one disoriented. And some of the best expressions of mysticism come in poetry, which is why I shared the Hafiz poems with you today. So with that as a little bit of background, I would like to share my mystic path with you. I actually had not thought of calling myself a mystic until I spent time at the University of Creation Spirituality, a sabbatical there for a semester with Matthew Fox and friends. And I realized that I was of their tribe, as it were. Their ideas resonated with me. For me, the mystical experiences actually started in the Russian Orthodox Church. Each Sunday, I went to church, but I had no idea what this experience was about in words, since the words of the service were in Old Church Slavonic, and even the sermons were in Carpatho-Russian, and because a lot of the immigrants, like my grandparents generation, the women never learned English. The men did, but the women didn't. So the sermons were also in Carpatho-Russian. And it was interesting to me when I think back on it, because I never had to be coaxed to go, even though God knows why I wanted to. And I know that some of it was drama. When you're a little kid, I was 5 years old when I started going to the church, and there's Father Curtis dressed in these magnificent gold robes, and he's going down the aisle swinging the censer, and all this sweet-smelling smoke is coming. It's like a theater. And in that church, we had a cantor, not a choir, and he led the people in singing, and it was just an awesome experience for me. And it was interesting, because as I grew older and could read, the prayer books were bilingual. There was an Old Church Slavonic side and an English side, but I just never bothered with it. I just was in the experience. And later, when my sister grew up, she was 5 years younger than I, she was smitten too. So we would sing the service in church, in Old Church Slavonic, and then we'd go home and we'd do it all over again. I was the priest and she was the congregation, her and her puppies, and we would do the whole service. And if my grandmother was there, she would help us sing. She thought this was great fun. So what happened when I was 14, we were out in the yard, my sister and I, doing this church service, and our neighbor Joe came over to visit with my father, who was relaxing on the glider, and he said to me as we passed, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to be a priest, and I need to practice." Well, my father stood straight up off the glider, all distressed, saying to me, "Oh, Joyce," he said, "you can't be a priest because you're a girl." I was crushed, but it didn't actually stop me from going to church and from doing the services again. So there was something there for me. Now, by the time I left for nurses' school in the 60s, the Orthodox clergy, realizing that they were losing young people, introduced some English into the service and began doing the sermons in English too. But it was not until 10 years later, when I actually had a kind of conversion experience to Orthodoxy, that I learned any theology. I mean, I really, when I was in college, I took a course in Milton, and the professor said, now I'm going to have to teach you this Calvinistic theology. He said, I'm not trying to convert you. He said, but you have to understand it to read Paradise Lost, because it's all full of that. So as I was learning this theology for the poem, I kept thinking, does Orthodoxy have that? Does Orthodoxy have that? I really didn't know. But it was kind of interesting. It was about that time when I was back in college, the priest started doing sermons that were actually talking about some Orthodox theology, so I did learn that. But when I had this conversion experience, there was this great priest at St. Mark Church in Bethesda, where I was living at the time, and he was a convert from Lutheranism, and he was just mad about Orthodoxy, and he had classes all the time, and I was there like a little sponge absorbing everything. Just discovered there's no dogmatic theology in Orthodoxy, but there is a mystical tradition, and there was a book by a man named Vladimir Losky. It was called The Mystic Theology of the Orthodox Church, which helped me with more understanding. And that was for 10 years. I was so content, so happy being in that church, because there was a real sense of community. We were all young. Because each Orthodox church has ethnic traditions. The Greeks, when they proselytized the Eastern Europeans, they let them do the service in their language, whatever they were talking at the time. So we have Serbian Orthodox and Syrian Orthodox. So there's all these different sorts of Orthodox people out there. And in D.C., which is a really cosmopolitan area, a lot of people who were Orthodox would marry people who weren't Orthodox. So there were Greeks and Serbians and Russians all over D.C. where the church service was still done in Serbian or Greek or whatever, and so they couldn't take their wives there, and they made this new church. And so for the whole 10 years I went there was never a funeral, because everybody was like between 20 and 60 years old, and it was a very vibrant community, and I was just so content with my feelings about God then, and I used to go to Great Falls Park in Virginia, which had all these trails and waterfalls and stuff, and there was just me and God out there, in the trees and the water, and it was just a really wonderful time in my life. However, unfortunately, the Eastern Orthodox Church is not immune to the patriarchal ideas that are in our culture, and eventually I needed to leave. That pesky priesthood issue continued to nag at me, along with some rituals that put women in the back seat. For example, when the boys are baptized, after they're baptized, they take them around the altar behind the icon screen. But girls only get to go to the front of the church, where there's this little dais called the tetrapod, where the icon of the season is, and that they got to go around that, and those kind of things started really nagging me. Joanna May, but I still love the Orthodox Church. I really am not angry with the church or with Jesus or anything like that. I mean, I love the church for the rituals, and I love the church because those different ethnic traditions are preserved through the church, and so it helped. Anyway, that's all wonderful for me. So Joanna Macy, I think, expressed it in such a good way. She's a Buddhist, but she was brought up in the Methodist tradition, and her family was a long line of Methodist ministers. And she expresses it this way. She says that her religious upbringing was compost, creating fertile ground for her to grow into the religious experience she needed, the religious practice that she needed. So I like this image of all the things that we do becoming that we know, rather than shoving them aside, that they become fertile ground for us to grow. So, I left St. Mark Church, and I continued my spiritual journey. And in a Cum meditation class at Shalem Center in D.C. that included movement and sharing, I learned about Matthew Fox in a sharing session. Because there was no Google in those days, information was not easy to come by. But Fox is a prolific writer, and I began reading his works. In his book, Original Blessing, he explores the Christian mystic tradition described by Meister Eckhart. I was so excited about the ideas in this book, which he describes as creation-centered theology. This is in direct contrast to fall redemption theology. Instead of original sin, we have original blessing. Jesus, by the way, didn't come up with original sin. Augustine did that centuries later. And the other thing I liked was we're not sinners, but we're royal persons, right? And we choose our own destiny. And rather than trying to figure out what God wants to do, we assess who we are, what our talents are and values, so we can create a life that helps to make justice out of injustice and to balance the cosmos. So there's always, so you see, in this mystic tradition, it's not just for me, it's to develop community. Creation-centered theology also gives us a God who is mother and child in addition to father, an all-inclusive God. God has to be all-inclusive if God or the universe is all that is. One cannot be outside. There is no outside. I love this concept as an argument for the LGBT community who are not welcome in some congregations. They can't be outside God. However, I confess I have trouble with Trump, whom I would like to banish somewhere if there were only somewhere to go. But this universe is what we have, and it includes everything. After I discovered this creation-centered ideas in Fox's book, I wondered where there was a church like this. There are none. Fox believes that when one institutionalizes ideas, they become deformed. Instead, there are groups around the world who meet and use the four paths of creation spirituality to develop a service for that particular Sunday or whatever day they decide to meet. So the four paths are positiva, negativa, creativa, and transformativa. So they use the ideas in those four paths. So creativa is about I don't know why I'm making that mistake twice. Positiva was about the awe and wonder of the universe. I mean, it's just such a blessing to be here. But of course, there is suffering. Suffering is, and we have to go walk through those sorrows. But in our life's journey, as we walk through these joys and sorrows, we are able to create. And creativity is what makes us godly. God created the universe, whether it's that spark from the great flaring forth or a theistic God. So we create something new, and a lot of times in communion with other people, and then we use this to transform the world. We have to look at it. It brings out of us, or out of the mystic anyway, the idea of a prophetic consciousness. And this doesn't mean about predicting the future. It's about looking at the culture we're living in and to see what about it we need to change. The unjust laws or unethical behavior, all those kinds of things that you use are so aware of that we need to help with. My sabbatical there with Fox and Company was a heart-opening experience. I participated in several techno-cosmic masses, which are raves without drugs. I mean, it was really awesome because he had this ballroom called there's a ballroom, Sweets Ballroom, had one of those disco balls. It was on the second floor of a building in Oakland, and I mean, it was California, so it was packed. People lined up on the streets for hours to get in, and they used the four paths to create create those techno masses, and I was privileged to actually create one myself, not myself, but with a group. We created the Festival of Lights one in December, and it was great because Ramadan fell that year in December, so we had altars in the 4 directions for Ramadan, solstice, Christianity, and Islam. And it's techno for the kids because they were on the wall, hanging high with these TV sets, and we would put on an infinite loop rituals from in our case, from the 4 religious faiths. And then there were movie screens, up on a little bit of a platform so that people were doing their dancing and they wanted to strut their stuff. They could do shadow dancing behind the screen. So it was just really awesome. So for both Positiva and Transformativa, there were rave dancings. And then in Creativity, we did a communion service, and the communion, of course, having to do with being connected with each other. And the one we created, rather than giving the communion out from the 4 altars, we actually had people sit in small groups and feed each other the bread and wine. It's a really heartful experience. Other things I did there were participate in a cosmic walk that identified salient episodes in the universe's 14 billion year history. I was sprinkled with stardust as a supernova exploded. I participated in rituals honoring the Yoruba trickster Ayegba with the Yoruba priestess Louisa Tish, and learned Native American dances with Sister Jose Habde. I fell in love with Brian Swimme, the mathematical cosmologist who taught us about the powers of the universe. Much of my adoration grew out of the way he exuded awe and wonder. I mean, if he was talking about waves and particles, he was just so excited about it. And then if he talked about his kid and how he was messing around with the hose and stuff, it was all wonderful for him. And as far as the science goes, I came a long way from thinking that we are made of stardust was metaphorical, and to understanding that we are indeed made from the same materials of the stars because their explosions created the elements that created us. Swimme says he does not believe in God, but he believes in the space-time continuum. And another cosmologist, Brian Greene, did a PBS series called The Elegant Universe. And in that series, he was explaining the space-time continuum. So the illustration showed this net-like thing, that was the space-time continuum, was this net. And then when he was explaining about gravity, he threw the Earth into the net, and of course it made a big dent. And then he threw the moon onto the net, in the illustration, and the space-time continuum, and the moon circled the Earth because it made a smaller dent. But what it reminded me of was, there's that hymn that says, leaning into the everlasting arms. So I was thinking that the moon was kind of leaning into the arms of the Earth in that particular illustration. So all these things seem to me of a piece, It's just a wonderful world out there. So, the last teacher I will mention is Neil Douglas Klotz. He's a Sufi, and he's also done translations from all those Arabic languages. I've spoken about him at length and how he created a new Jesus for me, this wonderful mystical Jesus in this both and world. The language Jesus spoke doesn't have any way to say either or things. So it's anyhow that don't get me. I won't do that. So I do want to talk today about him, about 2 things that I learned from him, and that's about using movement and prayer and developing conscious self-awareness. Movement is a part of Middle Eastern prayer. Jews move back and forth when they pray, and so do the Muslims. Klotz feels that movement is vital to prayer. He has developed dances of universal peace in which movement is combined with sacred phrases to enlarge the experience of prayer. He has developed movement to accompany the Lord's Prayer, for example, and you can find that on the abun.org website. So with movement, we understand the prayer not only in our head, but in our body. So we have a full mind-body experience, which leads us to our own divinity. Through prayer and meditation, with or without movement, we develop conscious self-awareness. This allows us to pull in our projections. No longer do we have to see in others the bad things we think about ourselves. We know about all these things and we acknowledge these voices, and we gather them around the table in what the Buddhists call inviting the demons to tea, so that we ask what they need, and we tell them we're in charge, so they don't have to try to take over, and we're not going to let them lead us down a path of self-destruction, but we'll take care of them. And I don't know, I just love this concept, and I learned Sue Kid, who's the spiritual director, calls her voices by fairy tale names like Chicken Little, the voices is, oh my God, the sky is falling, or I'd rather do it myself, like the little red hen, or that she uses the Tin Man, and anyway, I've dealt with my voices using those fairy tale images. But what's interesting is it's just not those pesky demons that we don't like that are in our subconscious. In our subconscious is also the things, qualities that we see in other people that we admire. And if we see them in other people, that means that we have them in ourselves. And sometimes these good things can be as frightening as the bad things. And the poet, so we discover our own divinity. And like Moses, we need to take off our shoes. Remember they said, take off your shoes, you're on holy ground. So we're on holy ground, but not only are we standing on holy ground, but we are that holy ground. The mystic priest, John O'Donohue, says that our biggest fear is not those pesky demons, but rather our own magnificence. For we are all divine. We are divine and we are connected. So my divine, interdependent self closes this talk with the words of Rumi. I am you in another form. Thanks.